Hello, welcome to another episode of the Data Science Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Cole, and today's guest is Anju Gupta. Anju, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for being here. So Anju is the Vice President of Data Science and Analytics at Northwestern Mutual. She also has a PhD in genetics and statistics from The Ohio State University. Today, we are going to be talking about the importance of model governance in data science. We're also talking about machine learning and actuaries. Obviously, Northwestern Mutual being an insurance company, there's a lot to talk about there. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the roles on your data science team that you didn't know you needed until now. Anju, you have all the roles, and I'm very curious to talk about all those various roles and how they work together. So let's start from the top. So insurance is one of those regulated industries, right? And so naturally, the oversight that happens due to being in a regulated industry is just sort of different than other industries. And so governance plays an important role. So maybe we could just start at the top. Like, how do you see governance, the importance of governance, sort of in your role today at Northwestern Mutual?
No, and thank you for the Ohio State.
Yeah, you bet.
Huge Ohio State fan. But governance is huge for us. We have got data governance teams, a steering committee that manages data governance. Then we have a model governance team, which is also separate from the data science team, but it is a model governance team that is, has responsibility towards the enterprise risk executive committee. We call it EREC. That has members of the exec team that help define how we look at our model governance policies as well. So what we do is we have a fairly robust model governance policy, which has been in play for quite some time at Northwestern Mutual. And we define what our key models are within the company. And if a model is defined as a key model, then it has to go through certain steps as part of the model governance, defining who the owner of the model is, who the user of the model is. There's different roles within the model governance policy by which we dictate all of our models. So there's very robust documentation that goes in as part of the model governance as well for any of the key models that we put into production. Each of these models have fairly well-defined model explainability documents as well that we put in place as a model becomes a key model. So it goes through several layers of governance and instituting a known base of knowledge across a set of governance teams, which looks at each of the models independently and makes a decision whether that model can be a key model or not. And if it is a key model, then we go through the steps of figuring out who's the owner, who's the user, who are the folks that are putting guardrails around those models by which the model, gets put into production. So there's various levers that we pull through once a model gets into production.
So let me take a step back there's a lot of data science teams out there, and I think governance in general is a good thing, obviously, but in certain industries like yours, there are actually regulations around it. So maybe, I have some questions about your process itself, and I'll get to that in a second, but why all this documentation? What is the purpose behind it?
Yeah, it's model auditing, right? Because these are the models that will be making decisions for clients as well when we give a policy to a client. So these are, if a model gets defined as a key model, then the audit trail becomes really critical for us. So if we ever get audited, we have entire documentation end to end for each one of these models.
Right, and the audits are going to be along the lines of, like, why did you give this policy to this person versus that person, and having that full audit trail and understanding, well, the model took these characteristics into play, and here's how the model works, and you have all that documentation
You
there.
have, yes,
Yeah.
and you
then
also
here's the data
have,
that we were using at the time, right?
yes. And you also have full visibility to who were the model owners, who were the model developers, who were the model users, and also who are the folks who put controls around those models. So those are fairly well-defined roles. And we
Right.
do that, we do that for each one of the models that go into production, and if it is defined as a key model for the company.
So that's my next question. You mentioned that a number of times, defined as a key model. How do you determine whether or not a model is a key model or not? Like, what are the criteria?
Yeah. So, we were discussing how we define a model as a key model just 2 days ago as well. So that's written within our policy on what gets defined as a key model. If it's making clients, there are several levers that you can pull, and every company will have their own recipe for defining what a key model is, which could be different than how we define our key models. But for us, it's really if it's making a decision, a client decision out for some of the products that we are selling, that it becomes key models. There are other levers as well that you can pull. But it gets instituted within the policy that you put together for your own company. So again, each company has to figure out what do they want to call their key models as well, which will be different.
And then you have also the members of this sort of governance board, which I think you mentioned was the enterprise risk EREC team. Like, how do you get on that governance board? Like, is it members? Is there a special separate team that that is sort of governance focused, or is it pulled from various data science teams throughout the company?
No, it's not. It's not the data science teams that are part of enterprise risk committee. These are the execs from various business lines, either risk or insurance, or CIO will be part of it. CISO will be part of it as well. But it's a cross-functional exec team that gets pulled together to ensure that governance is looked at the highest level of the company. It's very much ingrained into NM's DNA for sure.
Awesome. And then, what I'm curious if you can talk at all about like how, I mean, you've been at Northwestern Mutual for just a couple of years now, but I don't know if you have any like advice for others who are trying to stand up and sort of mature the model governance process they have internally. I mean, one thing that always is in the back of my mind is there's that ability to be agile, right? There's things that obviously you have to do just for the sake of your customers and for the sake of potentially getting audited, but that's that potentially slows down the ability for you to publish a model and put it into production. So like, what advice do you have for those data science leaders out there who are wondering how they can speed up this whole process and so on? Like, what advice do you have for them?
Yeah. No, and I would say that if somebody's sitting outside, they would think that governance slows down the process. I wouldn't say that at all, right? If you're bringing governance early on in the process versus later, if you're bringing them later in the process, then it's definitely going to slow down. They become the bottleneck. But if you bring them early on in the process so that they're working with you towards defining your key model, towards putting those governance documents in place, you have to ensure that you have headcount dedicated for this as well, because this is not an easy body of work either. There's, in terms of if you're wanting to define what your policy looks like, there's various articles out there that'll tell you, what a policy should look like. And one can take some of those, best industry practices. Gartner has a number of them as well, but there's various articles out there which tells you what the standard industry practice is. It's a defined, in my mind, it is a defined science. What's not out there today is a platform that lets you track all of this. A lot of industries, a lot of companies right now are essentially, working through Word documents and Excel spreadsheet on really understanding what are the models that they have within their environment, within the four walls of their company, and ensuring that they have model governance tied to each one of them. But there are platforms that are evolving in the industry as well, which we are taking a close look at. Those are the platforms. There's more to come, but those are the platforms that can help you streamline. If you don't have a model governance policy and you bring in one of those platforms, which I would highly recommend, then it just streamlines the process for you and make it much easier. For us, we do have a well-defined policy. We do not have a platform right now. So what we are looking into is bringing some of those platforms so that we can lean in and further accelerate what we are doing. But to be truthful, I wouldn't say it slows down the process. What I would definitely say is, if you are a regulated industry, even if you are not, model governance is extremely critical. And understanding what your models are doing versus depending on the black boxes of models, which is what it has become quite a bit, is critical. So make sure you have, I call them unicorns, your best data scientist, which sits on the cusp of both data science and data engineering as well, are sitting and ensuring that, all your model explainability documents are well presented as part of your rigorous process already, and not as something on the side that you need to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just a general best practice there that
Yep.
you should be thinking about, how your model works and, why it's making the predictions that it's making, and documenting that as well. I mean, there's also, the ability to, from an audit perspective, that reproducibility aspect as well, like being able to reproduce the model using ideally the data,
Huge.
which is hugely important. It's also a very tricky problem to solve, and there are tools and platforms, like you mentioned, that are out there that help with that. I think anytime anyone hears, from the engineering side or the data science side hears, somebody using a spreadsheet to track things, generally you want to steer clear of that.
Oh my God.
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. Well, that a lot of good information there. I'm curious if we can switch topics here and just talk a little bit about just sort of the world of data science and machine learning and actuaries. So, the actuarial sort of role, an actuary has been around for many years, and basically it's their job to assist in the underwriting process, right? And if you look at their skills in terms of what the statistical background, it's not too dissimilar from a data scientist. So how do you see that role evolving at Northwestern Mutual?
Yeah, so at Northwestern Mutual, our data scientists work very closely with actuarial. So I tend to call them a paired team, and that's where we see a lot of success in a paired team where one of our data scientists or a group of our data scientists are working with a group of actuarials. Our data scientists are well versed in dealing with big data, right? And actuarials are really good in being able to articulate the value proposition of the data that's coming in, or the results that are coming in as well. So one of the things that I think has led to some of the successes recently that we have had with our models is because we have been able to do paired programming with them. But I've also seen, recently, there's this Institute for Faculty of Actuarials, which has put a lot of focus around machine learning education and computer science education for the actuarials as well. So it is evolving, and we are seeing more and more of actuarials. I would like to see more, but it is creeping up within the actuarial department as well, just the learnings of actuarials within the machine learning and AI space. It hasn't touched deep learning that much yet, but definitely into the machine learning space. So there's more and more to come. And as we start to do the paired programming, we are doing learning for both our data scientists and our actuarial scientists as well. So I tend to call that as a converged science, that it's going to happen no matter what.
Right. In terms of getting those two roles, what do you mean by converged science? Like those two roles sort of getting together and working more collaboratively?
Yes. Yep. And one learning from each other, so that it starts to converge. The math and science behind it starts to converge.
Got it. Got it. So if you're an actuary, I mean, do you see that like there's a convergence, but it's also like just sort of being selfish if I'm in your shoes, and if you're trying to build out your data science team, I mean, do you see as actuaries as being a potential pool to potentially pull from as future data scientists?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When you think about the work that we do within data science for, let's say, underwriting acceleration, right? So bringing external data sources, using our internal data sources, and the guardrails by which we make certain decisions within a model is all defined and driven by actuarials within the company. So they are, they're a close partner of how we build our models and how we put guardrails around those models as well. Because there's this historical knowledge and experience that is just huge, which data science team will not have. To be truthful.
I mean, the life insurance business is a bit on the morbid side from a data science perspective. I mean, you're basically predicting when somebody might pass and what sort of policy you need to put in place, and that has been around for a long time. But as you know, the data elements that we're able to use, right, has really exploded over the past couple of decades, and I think that's sort of changed and allowed the actuarial sort of side of the house to be more accurate in a lot of ways, and I think there's a lot of learnings there.
And we work so when you think about what our team is comprised of, it's comprised of data scientists, data engineers. It's also comprised of medical staff. We work very closely with medical staff. It's also comprised of actuarials and underwriters as well.
Right.
So that brings that convergence of what good looks like. And you wouldn't be able to do it in a silo with just data. Data science just helps accelerate all the thought process together and being able to articulate it in a fashion that is reproducible and that leads to an outcome.
Right. Allows you to operationalize the whole process as well.
Yep.
Well, okay, that's a good segue. You mentioned a few different roles you have on your team. When I was talking to you in preparation for this podcast, I was amazed at how many different roles you have. Maybe we can just start there and list them out, and then I'd like to understand some of the unique ones. Some of them, most people might have heard before, but some were sort of news to me.
Yeah. So within my team, we have data scientists, we have data engineers, we have analytical engineer. That's a new role that we have created this past year. And then we have program management team, fairly robust program management team. And then we have data analyst as well. And all of these roles work end to end, what we call a CRISP. You have heard of CRISP DM, right?
I have, but maybe you can describe it briefly for us.
Yeah, so I don't remember each one of them, but you prepare the data, you understand the data, which is more of an exploratory analysis. You do some initial model evaluation, you do the testing of the model or the A/B testing, and then the model monitoring, and then you keep on going through this cycle over and over again.
Right.
That's your essentially CRISP DM. But having been able to do a lot of, I was trained as a data scientist myself, and this was 15 years ago. So when I was doing all my data analysis, 80%, and we had quantified that 80% of my job as a data scientist was about manipulating data, and 15% for model and A/B testing, and then 5% for putting, the storyline, the communication of what the outcomes look like. 15 years later, when I have had multiple teams, I kept asking my team, what is the convergence now? And what I hear still, it's 80% of data manipulation, 15%. The stats haven't changed. And one way to think about it a little bit differently is creating this notion of analytical engineers, right? So analytical engineers are fairly well tied with my data scientists and data engineers as well. So data engineers are responsible for building the data pipeline. So they bring the big data in-house, create the unified data platform or whatever you want to call it. ingest all the data into one place, and then, which is now available to a large number of data scientists as well. But then analytical engineers come into play, and their role essentially is to, what is the problem that we are trying to solve and what data do we need? So they take the data, so they are, in all reality, data engineers as well, but have the subject matter expertise of the problem that we are trying to solve. So they come in, and their job essentially is to bring that data asset together for the data scientists to work on and provide that, the ingest pipeline for the data assets that we are wanting to, because this is all big data that we are talking about. So AEs play a critical role in preparing the asset for the data scientist. Data scientist then starts to work on the data, come up with, then goes the real R&D. So we do tons of R&D, model evaluation, go back to the crisp DM cycle, come up, and then comes with an outcome. When all of this happens, then AEs come back again, and their job is to ensure that model gets deployed into production through an API. So there's tons of optimization, performance tuning that happens, because you can't ask, and being a data scientist, I may be wrong, but you can't really ask a data scientist to do tons of optimization, performance tuning, because they love to do R&D, right? So that's the job that we take it away from the data scientist. And once the model is done and we know their focus is on increasing the prediction accuracy for what we are trying to do. So get us the best prediction accuracy through the iterations of the models, add more data, or run tons of different types of algos to see which one gives the best outcome. And then the final model goes to the AE, where AE is an analytical engineer, where he or she is now focused on optimization, performance tuning, and creating the model API by which business can consume the models for the outcome that they are wanting to drive. So that role, this was not a role at NM just almost a year. I joined NM 1 year ago, couple months. And we didn't have that role. So we created that role. I've seen huge success with that role in my past life as well, and at NM too, where we work in work stream, and each of our work stream has a set of AEs with a set of data scientists and data analysts as well. So data analysts are very much focused on building a sort of visualization for the outcomes that the data scientists are producing and translating it to the business leaders as well.
The storytelling, if you will.
The storytelling. And storytelling, I just feel like we can get so much, especially in the data science space. If there's a cry out loud that I can do to the academia is around, if there is a course or a curriculum that we can create for scientists to be a better communicator, the whole industry will definitely benefit a lot from that.
Yeah, so those out there, make sure you can explain what you're doing to your business counterparts, because if you don't, frustration on both sides. And also, to be fair, I've also, there are also courses, right, that are geared towards sort of teaching, data science and the basics and statistics to executives as well. So, I'd like to see both parties sort of meet in the middle to a certain extent.
Yep.
But it's interesting, when you were talking about the AE, the analytical engineer, when you first started talking, I was thinking it sounds like they're sort of building the data mart, building up maybe a feature store for the data scientists. So they're hopefully reducing that 80% of sort of the data manipulation that you mentioned. But then when you said they also help to stand up the model APIs as well. And I assume maybe even the model monitoring. That almost sounds like, and I don't know if you have this role too, but like an ML engineer. I've also heard like a machine learning engineer.
Yes.
So, and so like, where do you see that that boundary between the ML engineer and the AE?
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned it because I mixed the both of them together. But we do have an ML ops team.
There you go.
And ML ops.
I told you
team,
she has all the roles. Sorry. Yeah.
So we have an ML ops team which we have recently instituted. That team is responsible for ensuring that all of our models that we're putting into production are fully monitored, right? And the model monitoring that we do. The intent is to provide visibility to the model governance team on all the models that we are monitoring. So we have a fully robust model monitoring pipeline, and there is an ML ops team that is responsible for the machine learning operationalization framework. So from model deployment to model governance to model monitoring as well, and that's a 24/7 team that takes into account, it's a support team as well, but they're also responsible for optimizing the performance of the models that are going into production.
Gotcha.
So they are, ML, we tend to call them ML engineers that are responsible for optimizing the performance of models that
And
are
by
going into
performance,
production.
do you mean, you don't mean accuracy, you mean the actual like time it takes to actually create the prediction?
Latency.
Yeah, the latency. Got you.
Yep.
Got
yep,
you. But
yep.
then the analytical engineer, is that individual responsible for sort of taking the model and turning it into an API before it gets handed off to the ML
Yep.
ops team? Okay, I gotcha.
Yep, and ML ops team and AEs work very
I'm
closely
sure.
together.
Yeah. My head works with my brain works with Venn diagrams, and I do see that there's lots of overlaps between the various teams. I can see the AE working very closely with the data scientist and sort of that crispy
Yep.
DM in the very early stages, but then in the latter stages, the AEs working very closely with the ML ops team, the ML engineer, and so on. And then
Yep.
with the storytelling, you have the data analyst, right?
And one thing I have definitely seen is what helps out quite a bit is having a rigor on the communication channel throughout this process. It's better to have more communication than less so that everybody is aware of what's going on versus not knowing, right? The early each individual is in the process. So it does create a communication overhead, but it just helps everybody, it helps move faster with the alignment that needs to happen within the organization to move towards an outcome that all of us are trying to achieve.
So let's dig into that a little bit. Are these folks all separate teams, or let's say they're all working on the same model? Are they all part of the same team? Are they sort of like Tiger team based, or do they get, when you mention communication, I'm picturing that the data scientist and the AE sort of reach out to the ML ops person at a certain stage, right?
They're all focused on so there is project based, right? So depending on what project the team is working on, the team gets together on a regular,
Right.
So we have daily stand-ups, we have huddles, so that daily stand-ups are for individual tracks of that project, but then huddles are where we bring everybody together to make sure that everybody is familiar with what the bigger picture is, right? But yeah, we do have Tiger teams where you have AEs and ML ops team working together for model deployment and performance tuning. Then you have Tiger teams of AEs and data scientists working on the model iteration and delivering an increase in the prediction accuracy for that model and things like that.
Last question on this topic. I just find it so
Yeah.
fascinating, which is in the storytelling element of it. Like, how do you see that working with the data analyst and the data scientist? Like, are they putting together like, is it a deck? Is it like prose? Is it like a written document? Are they presenting in tandem and together, or is the data analyst sort of that go between sort of the business and the data science team?
Yeah, they kind of cross data analyst and data scientist as well, depending on the project itself. But there's several collaterals that we create. One for sure is the white paper. Every model that we put together, we have white paper associated with it that one can go in and read about, what that model is supposed to do. Then we have internal data science review committee, which is a set of senior data scientists. It's run by data scientists, led by data scientists. That team gets together once a month, and then if there are models that we are developing, we bring them in front of the data scientists so that everybody is familiar with at high level and getting input from our data scientists as well on the technical rigor of some of the models that we are building, and if there are other ways to think about those models as well. So that's more of an academic
Right.
exercise for us that brings the technical rigor within the team. And that's where the data scientist or the data analyst, whoever is working on the project, will go in and present the work to the data science review committee. We also present our work to the model outputs that comes in to the business stakeholders as well. And that's when, our PM, our project management group, and our data analyst will come in full swing and put the collaterals together and share it with the business leaders as well.
Well, that's great. I said that would be my last question. I feel like I have a bunch more, but I want to stop it here. I really appreciate you taking the time, Anju. If people want to reach out to you, can they link up with you on LinkedIn and DM you?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. We covered a lot of topics from model governance to actuaries to analytic engineers and MLOps and every role in between.
You did.
Yeah. So thank you all for listening, and Anju, thank you so much for being here.